the war for the North had always been cruel. People called it the War of the Five Kings, but for Jon Snow and Robb Stark, it was a war of survival, honor, and revenge. The day Robb received news of Winterfell's fall and Theon's betrayal, something in him cracked. But that pain didn't make him weaker. It made him sharper. Jon Snow was still at the wall when the message arrived from Maester Aemon, a secret raven, not official, but personal. "Come home," it said. "Your brother needs you." Jon looked at Ghost, his white direwolf, and made a decision that went against his vows. He left the Night's Watch. By the time Jon reached River Run, Robb had already changed. He wasn't just a king anymore. He was a wounded brother, a betrayed son. But when he saw Jon, he embraced him like nothing else mattered. The two brothers who had always been close finally stood together, not just as family, but as commanders. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, had grown more violent since the Red Wedding was planned in secret by the Freys and Lannisters. But something was different this time. Robb could feel Grey Wind's senses getting sharper, almost like the wolf knew what was coming. Jon brought information from the wall. Wildlings were not the only threat. Something darker was coming from beyond the north. Robb didn't believe it fully, but he trusted Jon's instincts. Still, they had to deal with the south first. King's Landing, the Lannisters, and above all, revenge for Ned Stark. Catelyn Stark, though still grieving, supported her sons. Even she noticed something strange, like the direwolves had become more aware. Ghost and Grey Wind moved like shadows, hunting spies before they even reached the camp. Rumors started spreading that the old magic of the North was waking up. Then came the turning point. The Freys sent an invitation for a peace dinner. Catelyn smelled a trap. In the real history, Robb had trusted them and was murdered at the Red Wedding. But this time, with Jon's presence and Grey Wind's restlessness, they sensed the danger early. They didn't go to the twins. Instead, they turned the plan upside down. Using a small group of elite men and both direwolves, Robb and Jon raided the twins at night, quietly, with northern ruthlessness. It was bloody. Grey Wind tore through guards like a shadow beast. Ghost was silent, deadly, and cold. They didn't leave many Freys alive. Walder Frey was found in his bed, throat opened by Jon's sword. Longclaw. News of the Freys' fall spread like wildfire. Northern houses who had been too afraid to join Robb before now swore loyalty. The North began to rise again. Jon was no longer just a bastard. He was the hero of the raid. Robb declared him Lord of Winterfell, even if the law didn't allow it. The bannermen agreed. The people needed a symbol, and Jon was that. A Stark in all but name, brave, loyal, and feared. But that move stirred trouble in the south. Tywin Lannister, cold as ever, realized his plans were failing. He sent word to Roose Bolton and promised him Warden of the North if he betrayed Robb. But Bolton hesitated now. He'd seen what the direwolves did at the twins, and he feared what would happen if he chose the wrong side. Robb and Jon didn't wait for betrayal. They moved quickly, taking Moat Cailin back from the Ironborn, then turning their sights on Harrenhal. With each battle, their army grew, not just in numbers, but in hope. And something else was happening. Grey Wind and Ghost weren't just direwolves anymore. They were acting different, smarter, as if the old gods were watching through them. Jon noticed it first. How Ghost stared at him sometimes, like he understood things no wolf should. Still, they didn't know what was waiting in the shadows. While they marched south, a new enemy was watching from beyond the wall. And even though they were winning the war, they were walking into a storm much bigger than any Lannister or Frey. Snow fell heavily the night they reached Harrenhal. The castle, twisted by dragon fire long ago, looked more like a haunted ruin than a stronghold. But Robb didn't care for legends or burned stones. He needed control of the Riverlands, and Harrenhal was the key. Jon stood at the gates with Ghost by his side, watching the wind howl through the broken towers. "Something's wrong here," he muttered. The place reeked of old blood, betrayal, and something worse, magic. Inside they found nothing but corpses. Dozens, maybe hundreds, burned or mutilated. The mountain had passed through here and left his madness behind. But there were signs. Signs Jon understood. Scratches in the stone. Burned bones not from fire, but ice. And a sigil drawn in blood that he'd seen before. In the Night's Watch reports, the mark of the White Walkers. Robb brushed it off. "That's the North's problem, Jon. Let's win the war down here first." But Jon couldn't shake it. The direwolves were restless again. Ghost stood at the edge of the hall, growling at shadows. Grey Wind refused to enter the main keep at all. That night, Jon dreamt of a wall of ice cracking open, of thousands of blue eyes blinking awake. He saw himself standing before them, alone, while Robb bled out in snow. He woke up in a cold sweat, and the first thing he saw was Ghost staring at him, silently, knowingly. The next day, scouts returned. A Lannister force was riding from the west, led by none other than Jaime Lannister, freed and returned to war after his capture. But he wasn't alone. Behind him marched a new force. Southern knights backed by sellswords from Essos. Tywin's gold had bought an army. Robb saw it as a challenge. Jon saw it as a trap. "We can't fight them head-on," Jon warned. "They're expecting us to defend. So let's not." They abandoned Harrenhal the next night, left traps, poisoned food, false banners. Then they vanished into the woods. The Lannisters took the ruined castle easily and walked straight into their own grave. Men started dying. Wolves attacked at night. Fires broke out from nowhere. Ghost and Grey Wind led small strikes with northern scouts, fast, brutal, silent. Within a week, Jaime had lost half his strength. The night Robb faced Jaime again was strange. The two had been warriors on opposite sides of fate, but now they stood sword to sword in the middle of a burning camp. Grey Wind attacked Jaime's horse, while Robb fought like a man possessed. There was no honor in it, just fury. When it was over, Jaime was alive but broken, one leg shattered, his sword arm already gone. "Send him back to King's Landing," Robb said, spitting blood. "Let them see what's left of their lion." That moment broke the Lannister name in the Riverlands. With Jaime defeated, many houses turned their backs on the crown. Some even whispered that Robb Stark had been blessed by the old gods, that he and Jon had brought back the magic of the North. But power has a price. Catelyn received a raven the next morning. Sansa was missing. Arya too. The crown was holding no hostages, but spies claimed they had both been seen in King's Landing, alive but under constant watch. Robb's hand clenched so hard it bled. "We march to the capital," he said. "No more waiting." Jon hesitated. He remembered the wall, the dreams, the White Walkers, but he followed Robb anyway. That night, Ghost disappeared. They searched the woods for hours, calling his name, but he was gone. Only a single trail of icy footprints remained, leading northward. Robb placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. "We'll find him." Jon said nothing. Inside, something was changing in him. The war was being won, yes, but at what cost? Magic was waking. The wolves, were changing. And whatever was waiting beyond the wall, it was getting closer. Jon stared into the fire that night, and for the first time he heard a voice, a whisper from the flames. It said only one word: Targaryen. The march toward King's Landing began under storm clouds. The skies over the Riverlands turned darker with each passing mile, as if the gods themselves were watching with heavy hearts. Robb rode ahead, armored in black and grey, his crown dull with blood and dust. But it was Jon who people looked to now, not just as a warrior, but as something more. Word had spread of the whispers, the fire, the name. Targaryen. Jon tried to ignore it. He had never known his mother, and Eddard Stark had taken that secret to the grave. But the word clung to his soul like frost on steel. He didn't know what it meant, only that it felt like a warning or a curse. Ghost had not returned. Still, the army pushed on, gathering forces along the way. The Brotherhood without banners joined them in the Reach, bringing with them tales of the Hound, the Red Woman, and a girl who fought like a shadow. Jon's heart twisted. Arya? She was with us, said Beric Dondarrion, but she vanished before dawn. Said she had things to do in the dark. Robb shook his head. This war has stolen our sisters, our friends, even our wolves. But Jon stayed quiet, because that night, while others slept, he saw Ghost in the distance, on a hill, staring into the sky. The direwolf didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes, once red, now glowed with a strange blue light, and beside him stood a figure in black armor, face hidden beneath ice. Then, in the blink of an eye, both were gone. The next day, Jon told Robb, "Something's coming from the north. We need to send men back, defend the wall." Robb stared at him. "You think we can fight 2 wars at once? I can't split this army, Jon. I'll go alone if I have to." But Catelyn intervened. "No, if you leave now, the war here will die. Your presence holds the North together. You become something more than a brother to Robb. Your Jon hated that word. Hope was dangerous. Hope got people killed. Still, they pressed forward. By the time they reached the Crownlands, King's Landing was already trembling. Tywin was dead, poisoned by his own cup, some whispered. Cersei had taken the throne in madness, ruling with fear and wildfire. The city gates were shut, guarded by gold cloaks and sellswords. But the people were starving, scared, and whispering the name of the Wolf King and his brother, the Bastard Prince. Then came a raven. From the wall. Jon read the letter aloud in Robb's tent. "The dead are marching. The wall has fallen in one place. Eastwatch is gone. Tormund is dead. Benjen missing. Ghost is with them." It was signed by Samwell Tarly. Robb froze. Jon felt the cold crawl up his spine like a sickness. The war in the south meant nothing if the north was falling to death itself. But Catelyn stepped forward. "We take the city. Fast. Then we march home, or die trying." And so they did. The battle for King's Landing wasn't a siege. It was a storm. The Northern Army didn't wait for walls to fall. They rode through fire and blood, smashing through gates with a fury only the betrayed could summon. Grey Wind led the charge through the city streets, more beast than wolf now. Bigger, faster, a monster of vengeance. Cersei watched from the Red Keep as fire rose around her, and for the first time she knew fear. Jon found her in the throne room, alone. No mountain, No Jaime. No wine in her hand. Just a dagger. You look like your father, she whispered, staring into his eyes. But I see fire in you. Not just Stark blood, something else. Jon raised his sword. You burned the world down for a crown, and you'll burn it for something worse, she said with a grin. You just don't know it yet. Then she lunged. Fast. Wild. But Jon didn't flinch. Longclaw cut through the silence, and her throat. The war was over, or so they thought. But that night when Jon stood in the ruins of the throne room, looking out across the city, snow began to fall. Only, it wasn't snow, it was ash. And from far in the north, a horn was blown. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. The White Walkers had crossed the wall. The north was bleeding ice into the south. 3 blasts of the horn meant only one thing: White Walkers. It had been over 8,000 years since they marched. Now, they were no longer myth, no longer bedtime stories for scared children. They were real, and they were coming. Jon stood on the highest tower of the Red Keep, watching the snowfall thicken, ash mixed with frost. Fire with death. Below, the people of King's Landing were cheering the fall of Cersei, but their new king wasn't celebrating. He could feel it in his bones. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Robb sat in the war room, his crown resting on the table, untouched. We should have listened to you earlier, he admitted. You saw it coming. Jon nodded. It's not too late, but we need to act now. Scouts confirmed the truth. Eastwatch was gone. The Night's Watch scattered. Villages north of the wall were empty. No screams, no survivors. Just silence and the cold. Grey Wind had changed. He no longer growled or snarled. He stood at the edge of the camp each night, staring north, as if waiting for something. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. When Jon reached out to him, the wolf didn't react, like it wasn't entirely there anymore. And then there were the whispers. The Red Woman, Melisandre, had returned. She came to the northern camp like a ghost, dressed in black and red, her hair streaked with white. I have seen the flames, she said. The great other has risen, and the prince that was promised must face him. Robb stepped forward. Do you mean me? I don't care about prophecy. I'll fight because I must. But she shook her head slowly, eyes resting on Jon. Not you. Him. Jon's chest tightened. I'm no prince. I'm no king. You are fire and ice, she whispered. You carry both in your blood. And then she looked past him, to the wall behind where Longclaw leaned. The sword is Lightbringer, the blade of the Savior. Jon scoffed. It's steel, nothing more. But Melisandre just smiled. It will burn when the time comes. The Northmen left King's Landing within a week. No parades, no celebration. Only urgency. Jon, Robb, Melisandre, Catelyn, the Brotherhood, they all marched north, taking whoever would follow. Even some of the remaining Lannister men joined. No one wanted to die screaming under an army of the dead. In the north, the true horror had begun. Villages were found frozen over, not destroyed, just still, as if time had stopped. Men with swords still in hand, mouths open in silent screams, children sitting upright in their beds, eyes wide blue. The first real encounter came near Last Hearth. Jon led a small group into the woods, where they spotted movement. Not fast, not loud, just steady. Shadows between the trees, walking corpses. Maybe 24, armed, silent. And in their center rode Ghost. Except it wasn't Ghost anymore. Its fur had turned as pale as moonlight, eyes now burning with blue fire, chains wrapped around its neck, and its breath steamed like ice. On its back rode a white walker, tall, cloaked in frost, skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Jon froze. His heart shattered in his chest, but then Ghost stopped and looked directly at him. It didn't attack, it just stared, and then turned, vanishing into the mist. They returned to camp in silence. Robb gritted his teeth. What the hell was that? Jon's voice broke when he answered. They've taken Ghost. Melisandre stepped forward. They did not take him. They chose him. The dead remember the wolves. The old gods stir again. You must understand, this war is no longer about crowns or vengeance. This is about fire and night. One must burn to stop the other. That night Jon couldn't sleep. He stood outside the tent, staring into the woods, thinking of Ghost. Thinking of the voice in the fire. Targaryen. He remembered his father, or the man he thought was his father, whispering something once, "You don't know what you are." Suddenly Bran arrived. He was not the boy Jon had known. His eyes were white, lost in the past, or the future, or somewhere in between. He spoke slowly. "The Night King remembers you, Jon. He sees you now. He knows your blood. You're more dangerous to him than all the swords in Westeros." Jon stepped back. "Why me?" Bran's eyes returned to normal. "Because you were never just a Stark. And soon, you'll remember why." In the distance, the sky flashed blue. The wall was falling piece by piece, and the dead were no longer waiting. They were marching. They saw the storm before they felt it, a wall of snow and silence sweeping over the land like a breath held too long. Trees cracked in half from the weight of the cold. Rivers froze mid-flow. Birds fell from the sky, dead before they hit the ground. The army of the dead was no longer a shadow in the dark. It was a wave, and it was coming fast. Jon stood at the front of the northern line, sword drawn, eyes locked on the horizon. Longclaw felt heavier in his hand now, not just steel, but something else. The blade had started glowing faintly, like embers beneath the ice. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but Melisandre only nodded. "It is waking," she said, "because it knows the time has come." Robb was beside him, armor frosted over, Grey Wind snarling at his feet. But even Grey Wind, savage, loyal, wild, was nervous. He growled at shadows that weren't there, and sometimes turned his eyes north, whining like he wanted to run. They had no choice but to make their stand at Winterfell. The last true home of the North. It was no longer a castle. It was a fortress now. Reinforced walls. Wildfire caches hidden deep. Arches lined the battlements. Trebuchets built from stolen Lannister gold. But none of it felt like enough. Jon had sent ravens to every corner of Westeros. To Dorne, to the Vale, to the Iron Islands. Most didn't answer. Some refused. But a few came. The Knights of the Vale, a handful of ships from Yara Greyjoy. Even Sir Davos had returned, bringing with him what remained of Stannis' broken fleet. But they all looked to Jon now, not Robb, not the crown. Jon, because word had spread of his blood, of the name. Targaryen, he hadn't denied it, couldn't anymore. Bran had confirmed it. Jon Snow was not Ned Stark's son. He was Lyanna's and Rhaegar's. Born in secret, hidden in shame. Raised in the north to protect him from the south, and now that truth burned inside him. He didn't want a throne. He didn't want power. But the dead didn't care what he wanted. On the second day at Winterfell, the storm arrived. With it came the silence, the kind that makes even the strongest men forget their names. And then the horn blew once, then again, then a third time. The walkers had come. They didn't charge like living men. They moved in silence. Thousands of them, eyes like frostbite. Some still wore the armor of northern lords. Jon saw a man he once trained with at the wall among them. Another wore a Night's Watch cloak, black now stained with rot, and in the center of it all rode the Night King. On a horse made of bone and shadow, his blade frozen black, his armor ancient and cold, and beside him trotted Ghost, or what had become of him, a direwolf of death, massive and unnatural, snarling blue mist with every breath. Robb stepped forward. "I fight him," he said. Jon grabbed his arm. "You'll die." Robb looked him in the eye. "Then I'll die Stark, not hiding behind walls." And with that the gates of Winterfell opened, and Robb Stark charged into the snow with Grey Wind beside him. Jon followed. So did Tormund, Sir Davos, Gendry, the Brotherhood. Melisandre lit her sword in flames. Archers loosed fire arrows into the storm. Wildfire exploded at the front lines, sending bones flying. But still, the dead came. Robb fought like a wolf himself, cutting down 5, 10, 20, but they just kept coming. Grey Wind leapt into the dead, tearing limbs and faces, blood freezing in the air. Then Jon saw him, the Night King, watching silently, not attacking, just waiting. And then Jon understood. It wasn't about the army. It was about him. The Night King wasn't just here to destroy the living. He was here for Jon. Because Jon was the fire he couldn't freeze. He ran through the battlefield, cutting a path of light through the dark. Longclaw burned hotter with every step. The dead began to shrink back from him. Even the White Walkers paused as he passed, and when he reached the Night King, he stopped. They stood face to face. The storm howled between them. Ghost growled beside the Night King. Unrecognizable now, a creature of ice and magic. "You know what you are," the Night King spoke, his voice like cracking glass. "I'm not afraid of you," Jon said. The Night King smiled. "You should be." Then he raised his hand, and the ground shook. From beneath the snow, something massive began to rise. Wings, bones, scales. The undead dragon Viserion. It had come home. The ground split open with a sound like the sky breaking. From beneath the frost-cracked earth, Viserion rose, blackened bones wrapped in pale, dead flesh. Blue fire steaming from its torn throat, its wings, shredded but vast, opened like the arms of death itself. Every soldier on the field froze in place, the heat from the wildfire now useless against the iceborne terror above them. Jon's breath caught. He had seen the dragon before, at the wall, in visions, in fire, but never like this. This wasn't the creature Daenerys had once flown. This was something else, reborn, enslaved, wrong. The Night King raised his blade toward Jon. And Viserion screamed. A blast of blue fire roared from its mouth, lighting the night sky in sickly flame. Jon barely rolled aside in time as the ground exploded beside him, sending bodies, ash, and pieces of Winterfell's ancient wall flying into the air. The heat was freezing. Robb, across the field, was thrown back into the mud, his armor blackened. Grey wind rose over him, bloody but alive, snapping the throat of a reanimated giant. The wolf was barely breathing, but he didn't stop. No one stopped, because there was nowhere left to run. Jon rose to his knees, long claw burning in his hand like the last heartbeat of the world. Around him, the living were dying. Crushed. Frozen. Burned. And the dead were laughing, in their cold, silent way, marching, without pain, without fear. And then, Melisandre walked into the center of the battlefield. Her eyes blazed red. She didn't flinch as Viserion turned its massive head toward her. She didn't blink as the Night King pointed. She just whispered something in a language older than fire. The flames on her hands rose. The dead dragon opened its mouth. And then she screamed a single word, Dracarys. A burst of true fire erupted from her body. Not from her mouth, not from her hands, but from her hands. But from her soul. It hit Viserion full in the chest, a column of golden flame so bright it lit up the entire battlefield. The dragon shrieked, not in anger, but in agony. It twisted in the air, its wings flailing. Bone cracked, skin peeled. The fire tore through the ice magic inside it, breaking the spell that bound it. And then it fell. Viserion crashed into the ground with a thunder that cracked the sky. Silence followed. The Night King didn't move. Jon stared in disbelief. Melisandre stood swaying, her skin burning, her face melting, her necklace glowing hot. She turned to Jon one last time. "It's your fire now," she whispered. And then she collapsed into ash. But her fire remained. Jon felt it in his chest. A warmth he'd never known. Not like a sword, not like anger. It was deeper. A fire in his blood. A truth finally accepted. He was Targaryen. He was Stark. He was both. And now he was the only thing standing between life and death. The Night King stepped down from his undead horse. He walked toward Jon, blade of frozen darkness in hand. And Jon met him. Their swords clashed, ice and flame, and the earth screamed. Each strike echoed with history. Thousands of years of silence, now broken in sparks and blood. The Night King was fast, impossibly strong, moving like a shadow through the storm. But Jon matched him not just with skill, but with will. He wasn't just fighting for a crown, he was fighting for his brothers, his sisters, for the wolves, for the wall, for the world. Around them the battle turned. Robb rallied the Northmen. Bray Wind, bleeding and limping, still tore through the dead. Arya returned like a ghost in the snow, blades in both hands, dancing between corpses, cutting them down like she was born to end death. Sansa stood on the walls, firing arrows beside Brienne, the Lady of Winterfell no longer a prisoner, but a commander. And then Jon struck. Longclaw, burning bright now, not with wildfire, but with something ancient, pierced the Night King's chest. The White Walker staggered, looked into Jon's eyes, and shattered. Like ice dropped from a mountain, a wave of wind swept through the field. The dead stopped. Then they fell, all at once, like puppets with their strings cut. Ghost collapsed too, his glowing blue eyes dimming. Jon dropped to his knees beside him. "Ghost, come back," he whispered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Ghost opened his eyes, red, alive. Not quite the same, scarred by ice, but alive. The field was silent now. Snow fell gently. Real snow. The war was over, but Jon knew something deeper, something darker. That wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of what he had become, because somewhere inside him, fire still burned. And it didn't want to sleep again. The north was quiet. Too quiet. After the fall of the Night King, the snow no longer screamed. The wind no longer carried whispers. The dead were dead again. The army of ice had collapsed like a forgotten nightmare, but Winterfell did not celebrate. They buried their dead in silence. Hundreds of bodies lined the frozen field. Northmen, wildlings, knights of the Vale, even Lannisters who had fought for something more than gold. The godswood was soaked with blood, the heart tree bearing witness to a war that nearly unmade the world. Jon stood alone at the edge of the crypts. He didn't go inside. He couldn't. Too many ghosts lived down there. His father, or the man he thought was his father. His brother, Rickon. His sisters, lost and found and changed forever. And now he carried a truth he hadn't asked for. Not Jon Snow, not a bastard, but Aegon Targaryen, the last blood of fire and ice. He stared into the cold sky, long claws sheathed at his side, Ghost sleeping by his feet. The direwolf had never fully returned to what he was. His fur had thinned in patches. One eye still glowed faint blue in the dark, and he refused to howl anymore. But he stayed by Jon's side, loyal to the last. Robb sat in the great hall, his crown on the table, untouched. He hadn't worn it since the battle ended. "You killed the Night King," he said to Jon that evening. "They'll never follow me again." Jon didn't answer. Robb looked him in the eye. "They see it now. What you are. What you can become. I don't want it. Neither did I. But it came anyway. Catelyn had changed too. Grief had aged her. Catelyn had changed too. Grief had aged her. She had lost too many children, too many friends, and now she watched her surviving sons carry burdens heavier than crowns. Arya didn't stay long. She disappeared the morning after the funeral pyres. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just a horse, a sword, and a direction. Sansa, now fully Lady of Winterfell, remained at Jon's side, but watched him with new eyes. Not as a brother, not even as a Stark, but as something more, and something dangerous. Because people were already talking. The Dragon Slayer, the Fireborn, the man who died and rose again. The king who didn't burn. Even in the south, whispers spread like rot. Daenerys Targaryen, lost in exile across the narrow sea, heard the name. Her nephew, her rival, a man who had done what she couldn't, unite Westeros, slay the dead, and survive the cold. She would come. Eventually. Jon knew it. That's why he prepared to leave. One morning, before the frost had melted from the gates, he walked into the godswood and dropped to his knees beneath the heart tree. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered. I just wanted to be a Stark. I just wanted to be." "Good." The wind didn't answer. But Bran did. He sat in his chair, his eyes clouded with the sight of things others couldn't bear to see. "You were never meant to stay here," he said calmly. "You are part of the song." The last verse. The silence before the fire. Jon frowned. "What are you saying?" Bran blinked. The real war was not against the Night King. That was the test. Now the war begins for the soul of man. He handed Jon something wrapped in cloth. Jon unwrapped it slowly. It was dragon glass, carved into the shape of a flame, inscribed with ancient Valyrian words. "It's not a weapon," Bran said. "It's a key." "To what?" Bran looked toward the south. "To what comes next." Jon left Winterfell that same night. Alone. Except for Ghost. No banners. No speeches. Just a sword on his back, a fire in his blood, and a past that refused to die. He didn't look back, because something was calling him. Not from the north, but from the east, across the sea, across fire and shadow, where dragons still lived, where gods still played with men's lives, and where a throne of old waited to burn once more.